Thank you, everyone, for coming on this rainy morning. We are just going to tell you a little bit today about refugees generally, first of all, and then about IRIS, the Integrated Refugee and Immigration Services out of New Haven, which is the organization that has chosen us, or approved us, rather, as a co-sponsor, a community co-sponsor, to resettle refugees in our area, and we'll talk about that process a little bit. However, we do have a glitch in tech. This lovely, beautiful machine is going to show me our slides, but as a little surprise, to keep us on our toes, not in order. So it's going to be fun, right? I have my idea. This has its idea of how this presentation should go, and we'll just go from there. So the Quiet Corner Refugee Resettlement is the name of our outfit. Yeah, and the founders of there will be a slide later. The founders of this organization are Steve Lane, who is a local contractor extraordinaire, right? Is that how? Is that
Sure.
Good? Sure. Extremely practically skilled in many ways. And the Reverend Ann Plumley, and you founded the QCRR in 2015 as the Syrian refugee crisis was rising, and wanted to do something locally. They knew that our corner of the state would be a welcoming place and had the supports necessary to welcome refugees from Syria or wherever else we'd be welcoming people from that IRIS chose to place in our corner of Connecticut. So since this slide is up, I will let you know that of course this exhibit focuses on Ukrainian artists. And this is just a map of the flow of people out of the Ukraine. Where are they going to in the surrounding countries? This is, the numbers have changed significantly because now over 7 million have fled the Ukraine and 8 million internally are displaced. But it shows you the flow of where they're going to before they are then going on to Europe and to the United States and other places in the world. And that, of course, is one of the highest numbers of any one group of people is coming out of the Ukraine. That's one of the main places where displaced peoples are coming from. So IRIS, again, this a little different order, but IRIS is welcoming people from many parts of the world, and that includes evacuees from Puerto Rico due to weather, immigrants from 25 different countries, the Sudan, everywhere from China, Egypt, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, India, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka are coming. The Afghan crisis, of course, is the other, is a main source of displaced peoples. And that crisis that happened there in the fall of 2021, of course, that's something that people have been dealing with. IRIS has processed, I don't know exactly how many, but hundreds of Afghans. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
300 in October alone last year.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'm just going to see if this is where those people are being resettled by IRIS in Connecticut, and you can see that the numbers are low. The numbers are much higher now. But these are still the main places in Connecticut, and you can tell that, of course, cities are going to be better places to resettle refugees because they don't speak the language, they don't have their private transportation, they need to be in a place where social services are easily accessible, where public transportation is available. So they prefer to resettle places like New Haven, where their main office is, and in Hartford, and even in Manchester and New London. They didn't used to branch out and have community co-sponsor groups like ours in the quiet corner or in quieter places, more rural places or less populated places in the state. But when the Syrian refugee crisis happened, then they opened their minds and started looking at the people who were applying to them from quieter places in the state. And as long as we're on IRIS, this is the director of IRIS is Chris George. I think he's been there 17 years now. And what does IRIS provide? Well, they provide housing, what they do is they make sure that refugees are going to be cared for by community co-sponsors in these ways. So if you are a community co-sponsor, you have to be prepared you have to have a structure and a plan in place that they approve, saying, yes, we can provide them housing, we can provide them with a coordinator of health and wellness so that all of their immunizations are up to date, all of their medical needs are met, all of their dental needs are met. That means that the local co-sponsorship group also has to become familiar with how do we do that, what state programs, what social services are available to make that possible, because we couldn't afford to raise that much money on our own to cover all of the medical expenses for, say, like now we have a family of 7. So the state services and the state support are crucial. So health and wellness, employment, are we going to have an employment coordinator to find them jobs, the eligible adults? Will someone be there to oversee their education, to meet with their teachers in addition to the parents? Are you going to have, IRIS itself provides youth development in their office. They have programs for young people. Literacy is emphasized. Fun activities are emphasized. IRIS also provides immigration and legal services out of their office. They also have another office now in Hartford, where if the refugees who come need to, if they have legal issues, and that's common, trying to get their green cards, trying to move forward towards in the path to citizenship, or they have relatives in their home country who they want to see, can I get them out? Can I be of help to them? Can I bring them to the United States? The lawyers who work, I think pro bono for IRIS.
There's some lawyers on staff.
Some lawyers on staff and some pro bono. That's a resource for them. Acculturation is very important. There are programs at IRIS for people who live more locally, and there are a lot of refugees that they do resettle right in the New Haven area because it makes sense to have them closer for different reasons. But they provide programs that help them to learn what is it like to be in the United States, and what do people expect of you in social settings, and people can have very different concepts of time and what's appropriate and what's, they want to help people to feel not only safe but comfortable in their new home setting, to have a smoother transition for them and their family. And community engagement. IRIS has a lot of different programs for involving the community, either as fundraisers or Chris George is all over the place. He speaks at a lot of different events, churches, town halls, getting the word out, getting people to know about IRIS, and he really seems to value getting as many people involved as possible and to know about IRIS and to find a way to get involved. And community co-sponsorship is IRIS's model. They are kind of unique in this model. It used to be that if you went to an organization like IRIS, IRIS handled your resettlement and that was it. But Chris George, and maybe you want to speak to this a little.
It was a model that Chris George developed. It's an international model now, and it was developed in 2015 because IRIS could not handle the number of Syrian refugees that were coming through their agency. So they created this satellite program. You saw the map before. There's between 30 and 40 community co-sponsor groups just like ours throughout the state of Connecticut. That has then become a national program, and now it's spoken about on an international level, in that people are filtered into the community where there may be more resources, less density, more people, and it's a program that's been working really well.
I heard Chris George say in a speech once that, you know, people thought he was crazy, and some people still do think he's crazy for advocating this model. What are a bunch of retired people, you know, retired librarians or teachers or plumbers, what are they going to do with a refugee family? They're not equipped to do this. And Chris George says nobody's going to work harder for these people than the community members who are welcoming them into their own community. And he has a great deal of trust in exactly that kind of people who are not experts, and it has worked. Let's see what we have next. Oh, nationalities being resettled. We've talked a little bit about this. I think I've named most of these countries. I think I've already mentioned El Salvador and Eritrea. I did not mention Moldova. From all places in the world. A lot of
Sudan is huge.
Sudan is huge.
As is Myanmar. I read on the UN refugee website, as of 2021, there's estimated at 89 million refugees worldwide. And to put it in perspective, those refugees that enter refugee camps, less than 1% of them ever move out of the refugee camp to what we would call a better life. Oftentimes they'll leave because they're just tired of waiting. They'll leave to go into a surrounding community. Some of them will leave to go back home. But the percentages are so small of refugees moving from there to what we would consider a better life for them. QCRR started in 2015 and 16, and we came about because of the Syrian refugee crisis that was happening. All the Syrians were landing on the coast of Greece, and it was all in the news. And the opportunity was there. We had listened to a talk by Chris George out at your church, I think, Jen, in Woodstock.
Yeah.
And we decided to start an organization. We are not a 501c3, but WAME, Wyndham Area Interfaith Ministry, acts as our fiduciary. So they provide us their nonprofit status. They take care of all of our bill paying. They take care of our donations. They provide about 90% of the furniture that goes into our apartments when we set folks up. The process is that we ready ourselves and we give IRIS the green light. And by readying ourselves, it means that we've located housing, we've located furniture for that housing, our education liaison, which is my wife Julie and Carol Kraus, they communicate with the schools and say, we have families coming. Our employment coach is ready to get into action. Our medical team, our communications director. We have family support coordinators, case managers, if you would. All that infrastructure is set up before we tell IRIS we're ready. And then once we tell IRIS we're ready, we wait. Because refugee movement is a unpredictable thing. Last fall it was very predictable with all the Afghan refugees that were coming to the country. But we tell them we're ready. They let us know, okay, we have a family, and the family's coming from, they give us a small amount of demographics on the family. Family's coming from this country. Do you have translators for that country? So we typically have 24 to 48 hours to let IRIS know, yeah, we can handle the translators for that country. In the past, Google Translate on our phone has been helpful. With Pashto, which is the Afghan language, it's not helpful at all. So once we tell IRIS that we're ready to receive a family.
I think you mean with Arabic. It's been helpful, but
With Arabic, right.
Not with Pashto.
Right, it does not work with Pashto speakers, so it's not a tool for us in any stretch of the imagination. Once we tell Iris we're ready, we'll take the family. We then receive the family and we settle them into an apartment. And our last 3 apartments have been in Willimantic. We have found that Willimantic is very hospitable to refugees, and its proximity to the schools, to health providers, to employment has been very helpful for our family. So our first family we located in Mansfield, and although it was an ideal house, it was too far away from everything the family needed to be involved with, except for school. Then we go about helping this family to adjust to living here in the U.S. and what that involves. Mostly it's many meetings with medical advisors and coordinators to bring everything up to speed in terms of U.S. standards for inoculations and things like that, dental. And then they get busy with school. The kids get into school. Within a couple of weeks, the kids are in school, learning the language pretty early on. We have ESOL instructors who come into the house and teach English in the home. Job search starts. DSS benefits kick in. SNAP, which is supplemental food program, is allotted to the family. And then it's guiding them through what life specifically in Willimantic will look like for them, which can be how do you describe it? Which can be an eye-opener. We think this is easy from our perspective, but for example, here are these people that came from a war-torn country, and I'm teaching them how to recycle. And it seems pretty far removed from where they came, but this is what's important to us in this area. So it's one of the lessons they learn. It's certainly not the most important lesson, but that's how we begin. And then we move forward, and there's many struggles along the way. There's lots of missteps, but forward progress is being made. Language is being acquired by the adults. The children are now sometimes interpreters in a pinch for the adults, as is usually the case. Children pick it up much quicker than adults. So we're 8 months in now, I think. Yeah. The goal is to have the family independent of us by year 1. I don't think that's going to happen with these Afghans. I think it's a larger learning curve. Paperwork, all of the paperwork that they came with, official paperwork, has been wrong. In the rush to remove people from Afghanistan, this family went to Dubai, and then they went to Germany, and then they went to Washington, D.C., and then they settled in New Mexico. And then they came here. So in that process, the paperwork was hastily done and incorrectly done. So every piece of paperwork with their identification on it is in the process of being changed to reflect their real names, their real birth dates, and their real ages. And that process will continue forward until it's completed, so that we get it right. It's no longer like Ellis Island when you were assigned a name, or you could just change your name. We're trying to be true to the cause, and that we get it right once they're settled here, because this is who they are for the rest of their life. So.
Yeah. And just a little, we use the term refugee rather loosely in our culture, but it is actually a legal designation given by the UN High Commissioner of Refugees and the UN Refugee Agency. An immigrant is anyone who leaves a country to go elsewhere. We don't resettle immigrants, but that is the definition. We do work with SIVs, and SIV is a special immigrant visa. People who come who have often worked to help the U.S. military as a translator or interpreter, or perhaps worked as a guard, hired by the military. They do have a path towards a green card if they can get the SIV status. And this this differs from humanitarian parolees, which is necessarily temporary, and we are not resettling Ukrainian refugees. They're not really refugees, they're humanitarian parolees, because they are not eligible for any state-funded programs, depending on the state you are in. But largely, that's the situation, and a small nonprofit like ours cannot afford that yet, at least, to be committed to paying all of their medical bills out of pocket would be prohibitive for us. So we're not in a position to take on Ukrainian families at this point.
The expectation of a humanitarian parolee is that they go back to their country after the crisis has ended. A few years ago, there was a Haitian, no, it wasn't Haitian. Belize? Maybe Belize. There was a catastrophic weather event, and many of them were accepted into the U.S., and there was an effort to make them, because it was not an open-ended invitation, to make them repatriate back to their country, and that came about last year, and it's gotten extended. But humanitarian parolee is not forever. These folks, although they qualified for SIV status, we're in the process of getting that paperwork filed. They're technically now humanitarian parolees, which has a 2-year life expectancy to it. At the end of the 2 years, if they are not fully documented for the process, they could be sent back to Afghanistan. So imagine that. They could then file for asylum. But this process has all been clouded because, one, the Biden administration was not prepared for that massive rush last August when the U.S. Armed Services left the country, and the previous administration had dismantled all of the refugee networks. So all of that historical knowledge was gone. So it was, our predecessor used to say, learning how to fly the plane in flight. Information was gone. So that's part of the reason why all of this paperwork has been erroneous with information and needs to be corrected.
And it's also been slow to rev back up. There's a slide somewhere on that. Because all of the local nonprofits like IRIS and down to our level, but more on the order of IRIS, laid a lot of people off under the previous administration, and it's hard to rehire. And then the pandemic, and then trying to rehire people who have the knowledge and skills and backgrounds necessary, that's been a real challenge. So last year, the United States only resettled about 11,400 refugees. That does not include, that's just refugees. This year, the fiscal year 2022 ended September 30th, and it's been about 25,000 this year, but that's way less than the 125,000 that Biden put as the goal last year. But that's the latest number on that. Refugees have to have, in order to be a refugee, to be designated a refugee, you have to have, it's someone who's been forced to flee their country because of persecution, war, or violence. They have to have a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. It's hard to become a refugee. You have to meet certain criteria. It's a very specific designation. Most likely, they're not ever going to be able to return home because of the infrastructure being gone, because of violence, because they're under threat, or they're afraid to do so because of war and ethnic, tribal, and religious violence. But the United States has welcomed since 1980 3.1 million refugees. And once you are a refugee in a camp, can you decide where you're going to live? No. Who identifies you as a refugee? That is through the UN. The UN High Commissioner of Refugees has to interview you and determine that you are eligible to be called a refugee with the definition that I just went through. And how long are you there? we're not talking days and we're not talking months, we're talking years. You could be there for a year, you could be there for 10 years, you could be there for a lot longer than that. So the idea that these refugee camps that we see on the news, oh, they're just there temporarily, you know, with the plane flying over and it just goes on and on and on like a city with tens of thousands of people, we're tempted to think that's just temporary, but it's not necessarily. Those people might live there for the foreseeable future. But if the UN refugee agency thinks you are eligible that you need to be settled in another country, that you have priority, then who do they contact here? The U.S. State Department, and the U.S. State Department makes the decision about whether or not to admit that person. I'm going to see. This is just, you know, who's involved in the screening. A lot of people, I know people worry about, there's a lot of rhetoric about, is it safe to welcome refugees? Usually the people that ask that question, you know, don't have a good understanding yet of how hard it is to become a refugee who comes to the United States. It's a process that takes 18 to 24 months and 6 security database checks. There's the involvement of the State Department, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. It's an extremely rigorous process, and it's hard for anyone to become a refugee who gets into the United States, because when you're fleeing, you often don't have the documentation that's necessary to gain the status of refugee. And I think, Steve, you said this, fewer than 1% of refugees ever leave those camps to get to a developing country. Just the flow of where did people go out of Afghanistan. And I'm going to circle back to talking about, or to let you talk more about the individual services that we provide.
We have a core team of about 18 members right now, and each member of that core team is responsible for an area of the family's lives. And I spoke about some of them before. We have educational liaisons, we have ESOL folks, we have employment coaches, we have a medical team, we have Jen handles our communications and our paperwork, we have family support coordinators, we have two women who do a wonderful job with scheduling volunteers, and then under them there's other people that filter out farther beyond them. We meet once a month. In the beginning we meet every other week because there's so much going on in the family's life. I myself am kind of a gap filler in that I kind of just float around everywhere. I usually am involved in the communication with Iris and locating and settling an apartment.
Yeah. And WAME is our parent umbrella organization who provides us with the 501c3 status. So they're invaluable. All of our donations go to WAME. The finances are handled by them. They have a board that oversees their finances. So, and that makes the financial flow possible for us.
These are the positions on the core team. We developed a process by which, when we located an apartment and we've said yes to a family, we all meet. It's always been a Saturday. We meet on a Saturday. There's a crew that comes in the morning, and last time some Eastern students helped move furniture in. Jen's husband was there, and
Professor Ferrucci.
All the furniture gets moved into the apartment, and then those folks leave, and then people come in to dress out the apartment. So oftentimes we'll have groups that will take ownership of a bedroom or a living room and help to make that a living space. By the end of the day, the apartment's pretty much ready to go, and then it's just some finishing touches that happen. Pickup in New Haven is always a tricky thing, because these immigrants have This family flew from New Mexico, but many times the families have come all the way typically from France. France is the last destination point when our Syrian refugees came. But it's a very traumatic thing in that the pickup happens usually late at night. There's children involved. The children are exhausted. The family is exhausted. We have no common language. We show up with interpreters. We bring them to their apartment. We give them a really quick safety check about 911. We give them a cell phone that can be used, that's loaded with numbers. We teach them how to use the cell phone locally. They're all very aware of how to use cell phones. We talk to them about smoke alarms, fire extinguishers, and then we leave. We leave them a meal, a culturally appropriate meal, and then we come back in the next day, and that's when we really start getting down to getting medical appointments and having a more in-depth conversation with the family.
So I guess those, just skip on through. The homes are beautiful that we have prepared. I have to say that the people are so generous, and Wayne is wonderful in donating furniture. So it's not bare bones. I mean, the kids have stuffed animals. The cupboards are stocked. The kitchen is fully stocked. There's even porch furniture has been in the past, hanging plants. I mean, it's beautiful. The people who go in and prepare the homes, it's very moving.
We learn something every time. The homes get outfitted typically like we would outfit a house. This family from Afghanistan eats on the floor. So there's a cloth that's spread on the floor, and the food is spread out on the cloth. And me being the gringo is usually offered a chair and a fork, but I try to sit on the floor, and we eat on the floor. So we provided them with a table, but I don't know that I've ever seen anybody eat at the table. Have you?
I have seen one of the children eat at the table, but it was when a volunteer was there with her and doing an activity.
So certainly I think it's pretty rare, but that's just an example of a cultural difference that we didn't even know about.
Yeah.
And the bedroom setup as well. We'll set up, 3 different bedrooms. They just have a family bedroom. They all want to just sleep together. So the kids will spread a mat on the floor and sleep, and there'll be 4 people in the queen size bed.
Yeah.
So our learning curve.
That's our learning curve. We have a medical advisor who, we have both a local doctor who's still practicing and a retired nurse. And Willenborg's picture didn't come through, but they're invaluable in, making sure that all of the immunizations are up to date, and that all of the, well, you could say more about this than I could, but that all the paperwork is complete. So the kids are ready for school, and dental care can be considerable because that's culturally just very, very different from the United States. Brushing teeth every day is not a given at all, and let alone flossing. So it's just and dental care not given from a young age up can create a lot of problems. So that's usually a focus.
In some ways, it's like we would teach our own children, and certainly these adults are not children by any means, but when Julie and I were raising children, don't litter. And why don't you litter? Why do we not litter? Why do we not talk on our phone when we're in front of somebody else? Things like that are very simple things that kind of get taught in the process of interacting with our family, but that are very important because they need to interact. They need to blend in to a certain degree. We certainly do not want to remove their own culture, but they do need to fit into our world to be successful. It's especially the thing about community co-sponsorship that's difficult is when you locate a family in an area where they don't have a lot of common country folk, that, for instance, there's 2 other families that we know of that have been here for years that are from Afghanistan. That's it. Afghanistan has been a country that we don't have a lot of people in the area from Afghanistan. They are Muslims, so they can celebrate, they can worship at a couple of places. There's one up at Willimantic, there's one here in Willimantic, there's one in Stores. But again, there's not many Pashto speakers. So that's the difficulty in retaining folks, is if nobody looks like them, nobody talks like them, it can be difficult. Imagine myself going to where they're from and how I would struggle with that. So we try to involve them as much as we can with things that they're used to. Yeah.
And one of the people that smooths the path is Julie Menard. Julie, your picture didn't come through, but we can see your lovely face. Do you want to say a few words about?
I think Steve mentioned earlier, one of our first priorities is to get the kids into school. We also set up ESOL for the adults, but kids getting into school is a priority. And in this case, the entire family had never been to school, adults or kids. When the kids arrived, they ranged from 10 to 3, and we now have all 4 of those kids in school. They came in January, so they got a piece of last academic year, and they're now fully into this academic year. And the youngest is now in pre-K. And like Steve said, the kids pick up language very quickly in school, and they're thrilled to be there. And the Willimantic School District has been amazing. They've been welcoming, they've been flexible, and accommodating. They've been wonderful. So it's really fun to watch the kids blossom academically.
Yeah. It is hopeful.
And hopeful.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Former professor from Eastern who retired last winter, Libby Scott, is our technical coordinator. This is one of the children taking a nap on her. But she, part of what also makes all of this work for the family is people behind the scenes making sure all the appointments are recorded on Google Calendar. There are so many appointments that they have to keep between people coming into the home and tutoring and then going to all the medical appointments. And at first, that's about all they can do, is just, they're scheduled so that all of the boxes can be ticked and so that they are safe and healthy and getting what they need to be legally in compliance with things. And the technology behind all that is crucial, and just helping them with, I need technical support. I know I do, so, of course they do. Finding employment. The father, you could talk about this.
Dad works at the local bakery, Modest, out in
pictures.
Columbia, and Modest has been wonderful. They've been very understanding of his lack of English, his lack of cultural training around working where he's working, his need for time off for either family things or for medical. So they've been a wonderful employer for our dad, and he's able to bike to work. He's 4 miles from work, so he can bike from the apartment to work and back. So it's been a really key component to their success.
Family budgeting, we have a budget coordinator who helps the family just learn, refugees can come from cash-only societies where they're paid in cash, and the idea of having a bank account is a little bit foreign. So someone to explain that process, how do you use an ATM card, what is this paper check thing, things like that.
The first time that I took Wahab, Murphy had opened up a bank account at a local bank with him. First time we went to an ATM machine, and I had him sign his name on the back of the check. He'd never been paid in a check before. They came from a total cash economy. And imagine Wahab when we take this first earning check in the US and it disappears into the machine and nothing comes out except the receipt that's a piece of paper. And I had to explain to him that it's still your money, but it's not available to you right now. You have to wait a number of days until it becomes available. So I think they've pretty much gotten that system down. I am now teaching the mom how to do the banking because it happens during hours that Wahab needs to work. So we're going through that process all over again. And the concept of a checkbook is our new lessons that are going to be happening. So it's actually fun. It's fun to see the spark that happens when they get it and they're able to do it on their own, because of course that's the goal. So. Yeah.
And Diane Hutton, someone has to be behind the scenes coordinating with the calendar and the 18 core members and then the other volunteers as well. And so Diane is fabulous at that. And the I wish those pictures had come through, but you could speak to ESL.
We have 2 women that are on our team that handle ESOL with the adults and with the children, and kind of 2 separate teams that do that. The kids are, of course, in school, and they're learning most of their background in the school, and then they also get lessons at home. But we also have adults that come in and work with the mom and dad at the home. We try to key in, for the dad, we try to key in employment-related vocabulary so we can help him better communicate at home. I mean, at work with the right vocabulary, and then we go from there. But it's a long process. These are folks that never went to school in their life in Afghanistan, so it's a struggle. But you know, they're facing it and they're getting there, and it just takes time.
And ESL does involve outings, and so there's just a picture of, this is mostly our family with the son of a translator with them having ice cream, and they love the boombox parade. I so wish these pictures had come through. The kid, just imagine very cute children and very cute baby animals at the Yukon Dairy Barn, and you have the picture of just lovely to see kids coming out of a bad situation and reaching a place of safety and fun. And that's a great way to learn English, is with those animals right in front of you.
This was the newest member of the family that was born about 6 weeks ago now.
Yep.
7 weeks ago.
Late August.
Born here in the U.S., so it's one person in the family that we don't have to change any paperwork for. We got it right. We got it right from the start. But they're very proud of their newborn son, and it's fun to watch him grow.
Certainly is. Yeah. So, questions? Does anyone have questions for us?
The one thing I will say in closing is that these folks are survivors. They're going to get it. They're going to get by, as much as I might get in their way at times, or in their face at times. They will get it. Think about what they've gone through to get here. Putting ourselves in that situation, I'm not sure how I would fare, but they're going to get it.
And Iris keeps emphasizing to people all the time, to co-sponsors, you have to trust them. You're not there to coddle them. You're not there to make everything okay for them. You're there to help them do what they are fully equipped to do, which is to be independent, to pay their own way, and to become full-fledged members in the community. And that can be the challenge for us sometimes, because we sometimes want to hold on and give those extra steps and continue to do that. And Iris has to continually say, let them go, let them go. And that can be the hardest part for the volunteers.
Chris George, the director of Irish, says it's a messy business settling immigrants, or settling refugees. And it is, lots and lots of moving parts and repetition, but it comes down to just trusting that they'll get there. They've made it this far, they'll make it.
It's like teenagers.
Yeah.
They just gotta trust.
Yeah, yes.
They make the right decision.
And that's hard too, yes.
Yes, yes.
Ruth?
Ruth?
Question. I may have missed it, and it may have been inferred in the presentation, but I'm curious about the piece of mental health services, because I've dealt with internationals for decades, and
Yeah.
both the cultural piece of it, and then mental health in this country, and the lack of in other countries as far as people coming here. How do you bridge that gap? What is being done to bridge that gap?
Certainly it's stigmatized in countries that our three previous families came from Syria and this family is from Afghanistan. Yukon has been of some assistance with that, with our previous families, and Iris has a on-staff therapist that's available and can work with the family. It's nothing you can force, but it's always offered. The question's asked. When we see difficulties, we offer if they would like to speak to a therapist. The language can be an issue as well, so a translator's going to have to be involved, but it is a component that we offer.
And our medical coordinator is very aware of that and asking questions to screen for that.
Well, likely with the huge team of people that are helping, it's the relationships, it's the friendships that are built, and it's probably organically even dealt with also along the way, because
There's lots of eyes on. Not much gets missed that doesn't get passed around, and yeah.
I have a question about the hard documentation thing. Are some of them purposely given different documentation when they first leave to protect them, and then they can finally be like who they really are?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that this process was so messy because the training just wasn't in place, the translators weren't in place. 70,000 Afghan refugees came to the U.S. last fall. 70,000. And they were located on military bases. So our family was on a military base in New Mexico for 2 months, living in basically an aircraft carrier, an aircraft hangar-sized tent with tents inside of it for each family. And that's how things got processed. And then suddenly, okay, everybody's out. They move people out and move people into the community. So it was a quicker than reasonable process. Typically, for our dad, who's an SIV, all that paperwork is done in country. In the best situation, they have their green card within 2 months. This family may not have it within 2 years. Right now, it's about a year-long process. Families need to be here for a year before they can apply. But it's going to be even longer now because the infrastructure is just decimated. So I don't know that I can answer your question because I don't have any knowledge of that happening. I would not doubt maybe it does, but our family has what are called tascaras, which is basically their identification papers that come from their home country. And fortunately, they had the wherewithal to bring those with them. If they didn't have that, it would have been even more difficult.
So it's more like their birth certificate.
Yeah, exactly. It's this very fragile piece of paper that even as I handled it to make copies of it, I was just afraid it was going to fall apart in my hands. But it would be the equivalent of our birth certificate. But it has your lineage. Our birth certificates don't have that, but it has your parental lineage with names, where you were born. Yeah, it's a very interesting document.
And is there arts and music celebrated? Do we share that with them? Or are they?
It's funny you ask that because we, a couple times this summer, were down at Third Thursday, and our family made their way down there all by themselves. So 7 of them are down in Willimantic, not having any common language with anybody that they ran into, but they were probably drawn by the music.
It was like open market for them.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Yes.
From their country, and they want, you know.
Right.
Limited food maybe, but so they wouldn't eat meat because they eat halal meat, halal processed meat, but certainly they were down there enjoying themselves.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I would love to learn some of their,
Yeah.
you know, like if, I don't know, I could see, you know, music,
Yeah.
Yeah.
fiber arts and things that they
Yeah.
have that they could
I know.
share.
I know. There's so
You know,
much.
Like a knitting club or something like that.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
you can go to, or
Yeah. 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 That's.
art therapy, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. I'm more behind the scenes with communications and paperwork, but
Yeah.
a lot of our volunteers speak to, you know, that it's such a privilege to get to know them. And, you know, I know at the birthday party that was had for one of the daughters, that there was, you know, just put on the music they were familiar with and dancing and, you know, so yeah, the joy of sharing music and it's universal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you so much for coming.